you talked before about wanting to write back into the history people who had been excluded from it in the past, such as people who had technical abilities, practical abilities, and women who'd contributed. But presumably it was difficult because so much of the history has been written from the point of view of a male Western European elite. So how did you actually begin to write those people back in?
Well, there's two problems. They've been written out of the historical account, but also there is very little surviving data to work on. So for taking the example of women, there are 2 or 3 very famous women in the history of science that it's possible to find quite a lot of information about. And what I and other historians have done is to focus on those and then find out little snippets of information which prove that this is really the tip of the iceberg, that there's many other women in the same situation, and we just happen to know about a few famous ones. But there are, if you start looking, there are countless fleeting references to women, but which just suggests that there's this huge penumbra of women who have disappeared from the historical record. A lot of it is just common sense in a way. A lot of experimentation was taking place in private homes. There weren't public scientific laboratories. Scientists didn't used to go out to work at 9 and come back at 5 in the evening. The early experimenters, men like John Dee, for example, were working at home, and it's quite clear from their wives' diaries and letters that they were playing a key role in helping in these experiments.
One of the most fascinating things for me were the chapters on alchemy, where you showed it was perfectly possible to believe implicitly in alchemy and also be Sir Isaac Newton at the same time.
Isaac Newton left more manuscripts on alchemy than he did on any other subject, well, certainly on any subject that we would call legitimate science nowadays. A lot of the techniques which were adopted by chemists were originally developed by alchemists. I think there were varying kinds of alchemy. Somebody like Newton wanted to transform his own soul, to improve his own soul in the same way that lead, a material substance, can be improved and transformed into gold. So if you believe in a universe in which the material and the spiritual are very closely wrapped together, then alchemy makes far more sense than it does, I think, in our modern world, where it's very easy to parody it and to reject it.
You quote on at least a couple of occasions Francis Bacon, who said knowledge is power, the early British proto-scientist. And it seemed to me that idea of knowledge, and particularly scientific knowledge, representing power in all sorts of ways, really was a leitmotif of the book.
I think Francis Bacon became the patron saint, as it were, to use another religious metaphor. He became the patron saint of the Royal Society. Although he carried out very little experimentation himself, he was a politician, he was a lawyer who was the Chancellor of the Exchequer under James I until he was fired for corruption. And he made various pronouncements about how scientific research should be conducted. One of them is that you should work from observations to the theory. So you should work by induction. You should collect lots and lots of data and build up theories on the basis of the data. One of the other main things he said was exactly that knowledge is power. If you learn about the world, you can gain power over it, and that will help you to improve the state of the world and also the sort of common lot of human beings. And therefore, he argued, the government should invest in scientific research. And this idea that knowledge is power was constantly quoted right through the 18th, 19th, presumably even into the 20th centuries, but particularly when people wanted to persuade the state to invest in scientific research, because that's obviously something that governments like to hear, is that knowledge is going to give you power.
You say in the conclusion of the book that scientific centrism organises in the entire globe in its own image, and that is true to the extent that it's impossible really to conceive of the world in any other way. But you seem to be asking us to at least reflect on the fact that Western science has come to dominate the way that we see the world.
I think science is hugely important, and I think it's achieved absolutely fantastic results, and I want to make that very clear. So in a sense, I'm not sort of attacking what science has done. I think that we have a collective responsibility as a human race to think about the direction that science is moving in, to ask ourselves whether scientific knowledge is the best kind of knowledge that there is. I think perhaps we can gain other insights into how the world works and in how people perhaps should organise their society by looking at religious beliefs, although I'm not particularly religious myself. I think we can also learn a lot from literature, for example. I don't think science has all the answers about how the universe works and how we should structure our world. And I think some obvious examples of that are when science is questioned. For example, when the atomic bomb was detonated, 2 bombs were detonated over Japan. There's lots of debates now about global warming. There's questions about genetically modified food. There's questions about the eugenic implications of genetic mapping. There are all those big questions, and it seems to me that in a scientific democracy, which I hope at least in this country that we live in, it seems to me that the citizens in that scientific democracy should learn not so much about the products of science, because that too easily turns into celebration of science, but we should be taught about the scientific processes, about the ways in which scientific knowledge is reached. And I think if we knew more about the debates, about the controversies, could weigh up the pros and cons, I think we would be better informed, because ultimately as citizens we're paying tax. It's our tax that's going in to all these great scientific projects, either directly through the government or indirectly through private companies and through industry. And there is no separate entity. There isn't science on one side and society and government and industry and commerce on the other side. They're all completely mixed up together. And so I think we have a responsibility to find out about how science works, and ultimately by casting our vote, which is the only way we can express our voice individually, by casting our vote, contribute to making decisions about how we as a nation, as a race, want to channel our energies in the future.